Joining me today is Professor Trisha, the Chair of the ADEA Diabetes Research Foundation Council, and she will go through the ADRF Research Fellowship application form in details with us. In particular, she will go through what should be included and how.
So with the first part, it's the basic information about the applicant, where they're from and the postal address and phone number. These are really important things so that ADEA can contact them about their application when that's required. And the name of the institutions of the relevant people who are the researchers. So that's fairly self-explanatory, I suppose.
Now, this is the CV, and I think it's, again, self-explanatory, but is there any particular focus that you'd like the applicants to include in this part?
Well, you have, as researchers, many CVs. You have your overall CV that's however many pages long, set out however you do it. But this is a CV that needs to be tailored to your research application. So you need to show that you've got some background experience or some support from somebody else that comes later in the application, and how the project that you're applying for fits with your skills and your experience and whatever other important things you've done in the area. So it's like your track record for this particular project.
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you. Let's go to the next page about the administrative institution.
Yeah, so the first bit is the supervisor or the mentor, the person that's going to be guiding new researchers particularly, and that's the purpose of this application anyway. So they need a mentor or a supervisor if it's for a higher degree. And so that needs to be filled in here and has the expertise relevant to the project. So that might mean they've got expertise in randomised control trial design or qualitative design or epidemiology, something that relates to the study particularly, and how much time they're going to spend on this project. Often applications ask how much time they're going to spend on any research project, but this one's only asking for the time they'll spend on this project. And that needs to include the mentoring or the supervision. And the second part of that page is the institution through which the funds will be managed and the contact person. So this might be the financial officer or equivalent in the organisation that's going to manage the research project for them, prepare the budgets if you're lucky, and those kind of things. So it's important that that's accurate as well.
Let's move to the next part.
Yeah, so we're at part C.
Yep.
And it's talking about the project title, and you will note that only 150 characters are allowed. So really think very carefully about your title, that it must tell the people that are going to be reviewing it what the study's about. And so make it a very clear title. And then it'll be commencing in 2019, so that's set for this one, isn't it, I think? So how many months? And it's for 2 years, so that's already sort of filled in for them. And then the project description, this is really your protocol. And so there are two parts to it really that must be addressed, and that's how the project will improve diabetes education and care in Australia. That's the focus of these grants, so that needs to be up front, but it also needs to be realistic and achievable, not some motherhood statement. The second part of that's how it will support ADEA members and other health professionals to provide excellent diabetes care and education for all Australians. I don't know if that can be for all Australians, but how will your studies support other people to deliver really good care and improve the lives of people with diabetes? And because it's in Australia, we're particularly focusing on Australia, but it may well have application outside of that. And so thinking about how you can answer those two questions are look at our national health priorities and look at the Australian National Diabetes Strategy that's in place until 2020 and see how it aligns with that. And you should be able to align something in your project. So it might align with the goals for action in the National Diabetes Strategy. It might contribute to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. There are a whole range of issues there that give you some ideas about where you should try and align it. Then it will be judged then on your protocol. Is it feasible to do in 2 years? So make sure that it can be done in 2 years, that you're not trying to build a project that going to take 10 years or forever to do in 2 years. So what you're aiming to do, and consider that recruitment can often be very slow and have realistic timelines around the aspects of your protocol. Why is it important? What you're aiming to do, and the method then must be suitable to be able to meet those aims, and it must be clearly described under the things we talked about in protocols the other day. Who are the sampling population? How are you going to select and recruit a sample from that population? How are you going to obtain consent from them? How are you going to collect data from them? How are you going to store and manage that data? What are the ethical issues that might be involved? So a really clear recipe for how you're going to do your study and some timeline that fits with it. And it's also very useful if it is innovative, but if it's not innovative, don't try and make it innovative. Say that it's replicating the study that was done in somewhere else, but it's not been applied in this setting before, and that's the innovative area. Because in reality, there are very few new things under the sun. So try and be factual and honest about where your study fits in what's already out there. And if you've done a very good lit review, you're in a better position to say that because you're looking for whatever the gap in the literature is, or where it's important to replicate the study in our conditions in Australia to meet the National Diabetes Strategy and so on. Your track record relevant to opportunity is fairly important. And what that means for new research is if you haven't had a lot of opportunity to do research because you're a clinician, then that is an important thing, that the project will enable you to have specified and dedicated time to undertaking research and learn the process that you haven't had time to do in the past. Or another time there might be relevant to opportunity might be women that have, or men that take time out to raise a family or sickness, those kinds of things. There can be circumstances why you don't have a CV that's 10 miles long and 50,000 publications, etc. And that's not really what we're aiming for anyway. And then a plan for how ongoing mentoring is going to occur with the supervisor or an advisory group that you might find useful for your project. What's that going to be? What's it looking like? You'll meet once a week initially to get the project up and running and then as needed, or how's it going to be, and what expectations will you have of the mentor and will the mentor have of you?
No, I think it's very clear. However, I saw the track record repeated here as well as up in the CV. So what's the difference and what needs to be included?
That CV is just a basic CV, but here in Part C, the project details, they're asking the applicant to say how their track record is relevant to opportunity. This generally means that there's been some interruption to the person's career that meant they couldn't do research for 5 years or whatever it is, and they're now coming back into the role and wanting to get back into research. So they have to justify why on that CV there are 10 publications then there's 5 years with nothing. Explain that nothing. Is that clearer?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. So we're moving to the next page 6 on collaboration.
Yeah. So this is really important because no research is ever done alone, and increasingly funding bodies, including the ADEA, but around the world, are wanting to see collaborative research, and unless it is collaboratively, it generally won't be funded. And that collaboration includes with the end users of whatever product you're going to do. So that might be people with diabetes, it might be other health professionals. It's having that kind of engagement. And that can be through having them as researchers or having a research advisory group, which might be an ADEA. Well, we need an ADEA member somehow engaged in the project, either as a researcher or on an advisory group. And anybody else that can really contribute, it might be a method specialist in qualitative research, for example, or epidemiology. That might be a policy maker if you're developing policy or wanting to implement it in your service. You might have someone from there. It's very important if you're going to undertake the study in more than one site. That can be challenging for a 2-year project, but not impossible. So you would make sure all sites were included on your advisory group and have regular meetings with those. And how are you going to communicate the findings of your study to the funders? That's to ADEA, and through ADEA, the Research Foundation Board. It's also to the advisory group that helped you through problems and with some suggestions. It's importantly to the people who participate in the study, and then it's how it's going to be disseminated outside the study. So you need to think of all of those areas, and probably there'll be a report back to the Ethics Committee. That's generally the case. And the organisation, that's usually a short 1-page pro forma, but it's an important part of the signing off of the research. So how are you going to get your message out there to everybody? And one size won't fit all. So think about who you need to communicate it to, how are you going to do that, and when are you going to do that? And that might mean a very different 1-page summary for the research committee and the people with diabetes compared with a strategy where you might want to implement it somewhere. And then you need an implementation plan. So thinking about, can't do the implementation probably in a 2-year study. You might be able to implement something to evaluate it, but that doesn't mean it's going to stay there when the researchers go away. So the implementation plan is, if you find something very outstanding, how are you going to make sure that does get implemented in other areas or in your own area after the study finishes? So you might think about implementation strategies that are in the literature, like the Paris model, or I use knowledge to action, but there are a whole range of frameworks that can help you work out how to implement your study. So that's important too. You've got 2 pages here, so probably the communication and implementation plans are where you would probably spend your most of that page, but making sure that in the research advisory group or the collaboration, it's quite clear who you're collaborating with and why, and then how you're going to communicate, how you're going to implement. Then we're looking at impact. So generally you would have, these are the aims of the study and the outcome you expect. For example, one that I'm just writing up now, a report, is the outcome's going to be a suite of information about palliative and end-of-life care for 3 different groups in hard copy, in iBooks and on USBs. So that's my primary outcome. And the secondary outcome is going to be a list of diabetes-related factors associated with reducing life expectancy and mortality, which isn't on any of the commonly used tools in palliative and end-of-life care. So I've got 2, but you might only have 1, and if you've only got 1, that doesn't matter. Impact's harder because it's harder to know the impact until you implement it and then you measure those things. But you might have some indicative impacts if you put something in place and evaluate it, and you might put in a new program and you do medical record audits before you put it in, and then at 1 year and then at 18 months, you might see some impact there of a change of language or a change of practice. So don't disregard impact, but show it has to be realistic about and how quickly that's likely to happen. We know with most research it never gets into practice, and some's been hanging around 70 years to get into practice. So don't try and go against what we know. Be realistic about it. Then the budget. So this is very important as well. So it's not just what personnel do you want, but what are they going to specifically do in the project. So you might employ a research assistant or a project manager at so many hours per week at such and such a cost, and you need to look what those costs might be in your organisation or your university, plus on costs, and why do you need that person? It's your study, why can't you collect the data? Or why can't you set up meetings? So have some justify that. Equipment, generally, a lot of grants don't fund, so it's quite generous of ADEA to fund some equipment. But what equipment is it you really need to do that study that you don't have, and that can probably be used afterwards? So it might be an iPad to collect data as you go along. If you do that, there are security risks to the data if you leave it lying around somewhere and it's identifiable. So think these things through. And then the research costs. So these might be things like printing questionnaires or setting up your Qualtrics or whatever database you use for asking questions. Travel. Generally, that might be travelling to do interviews in someone's home or to deliver education, start-up programs in another place. Travel that's really related. It might be travelling to deliver the information at a conference. Many studies won't fund that, so you need to be able to justify why that's important. And consumables are things like printing and postage and return addressed envelopes, those kind of things. A lot of people doing questionnaires, if they're people with diabetes and they're older, actually don't like doing them online or on their phones. So having an option for them to return printed copies is sometimes increases your sample size, but also the sample heterogeneity, which is pretty important. So you've got a bit of space there to do that, justify your budget and put in the budget. I think you've got a bit more than a page, is that right? And bearing in mind the maximum is $60,000. So ADEA and the board and the foundation is going to want to see bang for buck. So why is this study going to give them value for money? And then you fill in the name on the Part D, which is the declaration form, where you're filling in your name and where you're from and signing it, and then the supervisor or mentor signs it. And I think somewhere else you've got the organisational signature on another page back there. And then you need to select all of these boxes that you're agreeing to. So to submit the results to peer-reviewed publications. And note it says submit. It doesn't say publish it because that's outside your control. Submit to ADEA or ADE. Does that mean ADEA?
It's the ADE publication.
And this could be part of your distribution. I think you really need a publication plan as well, and even if that's only 1 or 2 publications, that can be part of your dissemination plan. And then you're agreeing to comply with the terms of the Research Foundation and ethical standards. And so you can't do this research without ethics approval unless you get a waiver of consent, which is There are certain conditions for that. And then the divisional head, this is the head of school, for example, or head of your department, and they're saying these are the facilities are available to support you to do research. So you'll have access to the library, you'll have access to a computer, whatever it is that's going to support the research that they can do. If they give you some extra money, that's a bonus. And then the administering institution is your hospital or your university or whatever. So I think that's about it. And we don't really have anybody there asking questions, but people should feel free to ask questions of people like you or me or other researchers that they know if they need help. And another really key point is read it again, put it down, leave it, read it again, get grandma to read it, just being very clear that it's logical and easy to read. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much, Trisha. I think that's very useful.
We hope you find this information video useful. If you have any questions about the fellowship application, please email us at research@adea.com.au. Thank you.